What if I told you these ancient fortresses were built in places even modern engineers would fear to build? For thousands of years, these impossible fortresses have hidden secrets that historians still can't fully explain.
Welcome to African Uncovered. Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering that the past was nothing like we were taught. Imagine learning that thousands of years ago, people carved stone with a level of precision that even our modern machines struggle to reproduce. Imagine entire landscapes engineered with geometric perfection, so vast they can only be fully seen from the sky. Imagine objects buried in ancient soil, revealing knowledge of astronomy, metallurgy, and mathematics long before those sciences were supposedly understood. These are not isolated mysteries. They appear again and again across continents that never knew each other. And the deeper researchers look, the stranger the pattern becomes. Because if these achievements were truly made by ancient hands, then history may not be a story of progress at all, but the story of something extraordinary humanity once knew and somehow lost. On a violent stretch of coastline where the North Sea crashes endlessly against black cliffs, there stands a fortress that seems almost impossible. From a distance, it looks less like something built by human beings and more like part of the landscape itself, a mass of stone clinging to a narrow pillar of rock surrounded by open ocean. This is Dunnottar, a stronghold so precariously placed that it seems as if one powerful storm could rip it from the earth and throw it into the sea below. And yet, it has endured for centuries. What visitors see today are the haunting remains of a medieval castle, but beneath those weathered walls lies something much older and far more mysterious. The core defensive walls of an ancient cliff fort hidden deep within the foundations of the later fortress. Archaeologists believe these deeper layers may date back to the early medieval period, and possibly even to the enigmatic Pictish culture that once ruled northern Britain. The mystery is not only how old these walls are, but how they were built in such a brutal environment. High above the sea, exposed to savage winds and relentless storms, ancient builders somehow managed to create a defensive structure whose foundations have survived for more than 1,000 years. The fortress stands on a rocky headland just south of modern Stonehaven, where a narrow strip of land connects the clifftop plateau to the mainland. On three sides, sheer rock faces plunge almost straight into the sea, forming natural defenses so strong the place feels like an island. The only access is a steep, winding path carved into the cliffside, so narrow that only a few people can pass at once. Because of this remarkable geography, the site was almost certainly used for defense for a very long time. Historical records mention a fortress here as early as the 9th century, during violent struggles between the rising kingdoms of Scotland. But archaeological evidence suggests the location may have been fortified even earlier by the Picts, a mysterious people whose carved stones and symbolic art remain among the most puzzling survivals of early Britain. Over time, the original fortification evolved into the larger medieval castle that later dominated the headland. But when archaeologists examined the structure more closely, they found something unexpected. Parts of the fortress walls were clearly older than the castle built around them. These deeper layers, known as the core walls of the cliff fort, lie at the heart of Dunnottar's mystery. Unlike the later castle walls, which were built with carefully mortared masonry, the older structures appear to be made from massive stone blocks fitted together with impressive precision. In some places, the stones were simply stacked and balanced by gravity and careful placement rather than mortar. This was not unusual in ancient fortifications, but what makes Dunnottar extraordinary is the location in which those methods were used. The cliff platform is narrow, uneven, and constantly battered by ocean winds and salt spray. Transporting heavy stones to the summit would have required enormous effort. There are no convenient quarries on the plateau itself, which means the building material had to be hauled up from below or brought along difficult coastal routes. Even with modern equipment, such a project would be a challenge. For early medieval builders using simple tools, it must have been an astonishing achievement of planning and determination. The most striking question is why they chose this particular cliff in the first place. Throughout ancient Europe, hilltop forts were common because high ground offered clear defensive advantages. But Dunnottar goes far beyond a normal hill fort. Its builders selected a narrow promontory, almost entirely cut off by cliffs and sea. That suggests the site was not only strategic, but symbolically powerful. From the summit, defenders could watch vast stretches of coastline and spot approaching ships long before they reached land. The narrow land bridge could be defended by only a handful of warriors. In effect, the cliffs formed a natural wall, far stronger than anything humans could build. And yet, that raises another question. If the place was already so defensible, why spend so much labor building additional walls?
One possibility is that Dunnottar served not only as a military stronghold, but also as a royal or ceremonial center, a place where regional rulers needed a fortress that was nearly impossible to take. Other mysteries surround the earliest occupation of the site. Archaeological evidence suggests the original fortress may once have included wooden halls, defensive earthworks, and storage buildings that have long since vanished. But because later generations repeatedly rebuilt and expanded the castle, these earlier layers remain buried beneath medieval structures and are extremely difficult to study. Another puzzle is the problem of survival on such an isolated cliff. Fresh water sources on the headland are limited, and all food and supplies would have had to be carried up the steep path. Maintaining a permanent community there would have required a highly organized support system from nearby settlements along the coast. History added even more layers to Dunnottar's story. In the later medieval period, it became one of the most powerful fortresses in Scotland, tied to noble families and dramatic political conflicts. In the 17th century, it famously sheltered the honors of Scotland, the crown jewels of the Scottish monarchy, protecting them from capture during war with England. Yet, despite centuries of warfare, rebuilding, and political upheaval, the ancient foundations remained hidden inside the structure, quietly preserving the achievements of its earliest builders. Today, the ruins of Dunnottar rise silently above the crashing waves, their weathered stones glowing red in the changing light of the North Sea. Most visitors focus on the dramatic medieval castle, but beneath those ruins lies a deeper story written in the ancient core walls, hidden within the cliff itself. These stones are the oldest witnesses to Dunnottar's past, reminders of a forgotten fortress built by a culture whose engineering skill and strategic vision are still only partly understood. And even after centuries of study, one question still hangs in the sea wind. How did ancient builders raise a fortress on a rock that seems barely meant to hold anything at all? High above the forests and valleys of the Crimean Mountains rises a vast limestone plateau that once concealed one of the most extraordinary fortresses ever created by human hands. At first glance, the cliffs appear empty and silent, shaped only by wind and time. But hidden inside the rock is an entire ancient city carved directly into the mountain itself. Hundreds of chambers, corridors, and defensive galleries cut into the vertical cliffs form a labyrinth that once protected a medieval kingdom. This place is known as Mangup Kale, a fortress so brilliantly designed that the mountain itself became its walls. For centuries, Mangup Kale stood as a nearly impregnable stronghold. Yet today, its empty caves leave behind a haunting question. How did ancient builders transform an inaccessible plateau into one of the most sophisticated defensive cities of the medieval world? Mangup Kale is located in the mountainous region of southwestern Crimea, where a massive plateau rises about 600 meters above the valleys below. The summit stretches across nearly 90 hectares, forming a natural stronghold surrounded on three sides by sheer limestone cliffs. Only a few narrow ridges provide access to the plateau, making it an ideal location for a fortified settlement. Archaeological evidence suggests the site began to develop during the late Roman and early Byzantine periods, likely around the 5th or 6th century. Over the centuries, it grew in importance, eventually becoming the capital of the Principality of Theodoro, a small but resilient Byzantine successor state that controlled part of Crimea during the medieval era. When European travelers and historians visited the region in the 18th and 19th centuries, they found a mysterious landscape of ruined walls, collapsed towers, and strange openings carved into the cliff faces. Early accounts describe dozens of cave chambers cut into the rock, revealing that Mangup Kale was not just a fortress built on top of a mountain, but something far stranger. Later excavations confirmed that the plateau once supported a thriving city of churches, homes, workshops, and fortifications. But the most remarkable feature was the vast network of artificial caves carved directly into the cliffs that surrounded the city. What makes Mangup Kale unique is the astonishing system of cliff-cut caves that formed part of its defense. Instead of building all their fortifications above ground, the city's builders turned the mountain itself into a fortress. Hundreds of chambers were hollowed into the vertical limestone, creating storage rooms, guard posts, living quarters, and military galleries hidden inside the rock. Many of these caves show remarkable precision. Their walls are straight, their ceilings flat, and their interiors carefully shaped rather than roughly hollowed out. Narrow openings cut through the cliff face functioned as observation points or arrow slits, allowing defenders to monitor the valleys below and fire on enemies trying to climb the slopes while remaining protected inside the mountain. The cliffs themselves became a ring of hidden defensive towers.
This made Mangup Kale incredibly difficult to attack. Even if an enemy reached the summit or broke through the outer walls, defenders could retreat into the cliff chambers and continue fighting from concealed positions. In that sense, Mangup Kale was not just a fortified city. It was a giant defensive machine carved into the landscape itself. And still, many mysteries remain. One of the biggest concerns the construction of the cliff chambers. The limestone faces around the plateau are steep and often extremely difficult to reach. Yet many caves were carved at heights that would have required advanced scaffolding, rope systems, or other complex methods. Medieval builders using simple tools somehow managed to excavate large, geometrically shaped rooms in places that are still difficult for modern climbers. Another mystery lies in the organization of the cave network. Some chambers clearly served military purposes, especially those with arrow slits and narrow firing ports. Others seem to have been storage spaces or living areas. Archaeologists have also found cave churches containing carved altars and traces of decoration, suggesting that spiritual life extended deep into the stone of the fortress itself. The strategic design of the city raises more questions. Because the plateau was naturally protected by cliffs on three sides, builders concentrated their strongest fortifications on the few routes that gave access to the summit. Massive walls and towers guarded these narrow approaches, while the cliff caves formed an additional defensive ring around the city. Perhaps the greatest mystery of all is why Mangup Kale declined so suddenly. In 1475, the Ottoman Empire launched a siege against the fortress. Historical records describe a long struggle before the city finally fell, but after the conquest, Mangup Kale rapidly lost its importance. Many of its inhabitants abandoned the plateau, and the once thriving city slowly faded into silence. What makes that especially intriguing is that many ruins show relatively little destruction,
suggesting the city may have emptied quickly rather than being totally devastated by war. Today, Mangup Kale remains one of the most extraordinary archaeological landscapes in Eastern Europe. Its ruined walls still stretch across the plateau, while the cliffs below continue to hide the chambers carved centuries ago. Standing at the edge of those cliffs, it becomes clear why the place has fascinated historians for so long. The builders of Mangup Kale did not simply build on a mountain, they reshaped the mountain into a fortress. Even now, the silent caves preserve unanswered questions about the people who carved them, the strategies that guided their design, and the mysterious fate of the city that once stood high above the valleys of Crimea. In the middle of one of Central Asia's harshest deserts, enormous walls rise from the sand where almost nothing else survives. There are no forests nearby, no great cities, and no clear sign of why anyone would have chosen such a place. Only wind, heat, and an endless horizon of desert. Yet more than 2,000 years ago, someone built massive fortresses here, placing them carefully on isolated hills, as if guarding something invisible in the emptiness. Today, these ruins are known as Ayaz Kala, and they raise a question that still puzzles historians and archaeologists. Why would an ancient civilization build such powerful strongholds in the middle of what now appears to be nowhere? Ayaz Kala lies deep within the remote reaches of the Kizilkum Desert in Karakalpakstan, in modern Uzbekistan. The ruins belong to the world of the ancient Khwarezm civilization, a powerful culture that once flourished along the shifting channels of the Amu Darya River. Archaeological evidence suggests the earliest fortifications were built around the 4th century BCE, when Khwarezm was developing a network of frontier defenses to protect its territory. Although local people had long known of the towering ruins scattered across the desert hills, the site only attracted major scientific attention in the 20th century, when Soviet expeditions began mapping the forgotten fortresses of ancient Khwarezm. Among all those ruins, Ayaz Kala stood out immediately. It was not just one fortress, but a group of 3 separate strongholds positioned on elevated ground and clearly linked to one another. The largest, Ayaz Kala I, sits atop a high ridge that dominates the surrounding landscape. Its walls once rose nearly 10 meters high and enclosed a vast area large enough to shelter a substantial garrison. Nearby stand the remains of Ayaz Kala II and Ayaz Kala III, smaller fortresses that may have served as supporting settlements or administrative centers. Together, they form a defensive cluster that suggests deliberate planning rather than chance placement. What makes Ayaz Kala so remarkable is not only its scale, but its location. Most ancient fortresses were built near fertile land, trade routes, or major population centers. Ayaz Kala stands in what now seems to be an almost lifeless desert. From the top of the walls, every direction reveals only the wide expanse of the Kizilkum. There are no obvious rivers or lakes nearby, and the terrain looks too unforgiving to support a large permanent settlement. Yet the fortress walls are thick, carefully engineered, and reinforced with regularly spaced towers, clearly designed for serious defense. That contradiction lies at the heart of Ayaz Kala's mystery. If the land around it was always this barren, what exactly was the fortress protecting? Some researchers believe the answer lies in the ancient geography of the region. Thousands of years ago, channels of the Amu Darya created a complex delta of canals and irrigation systems that supported a thriving agricultural landscape. The desert we see today may once have been fertile farmland connected by waterways. If that is true, Ayaz Kala may have served as a frontier defense system, guarding the northern edge of the Khwarezmian kingdom from raids by nomadic groups crossing the steppe. Even so, the size and sophistication of the fortifications suggest something more than a simple border post. The fortress seems built to withstand prolonged attack, which hints that this region once held a strategic importance far greater than the modern landscape suggests. Another puzzle is water. Maintaining a fortress large enough to house soldiers and officials would have required a reliable supply. Yet, excavations have revealed only limited evidence for wells within the site. Some scholars believe water was brought from irrigation canals connected to the old Amu Darya system. Others think underground reservoirs or seasonal storage systems once existed, but later collapsed or were buried by centuries of sand. The arrangement of the three fortresses adds another layer of mystery. Ayaz Kala 1, 2, and 3 appear to have been placed so that each could observe the others. From the main fortress, it is possible to see the neighboring ruins across the desert plain. That suggests a coordinated defense network, where smoke, fire, or reflective signals may have been used to warn of approaching enemies. If so, Ayaz Kala may represent an early form of regional surveillance, allowing defenders to monitor movement across a wide desert frontier. There is also the question of the people who lived there. Ayaz Kala 1 clearly had a military function, but the layout of the smaller fortresses suggests residential or administrative use. That implies the complex may have housed not only soldiers, but also officials, craftsmen, and perhaps families tied to the regional government of Khwarezm. The most intriguing mystery may be why the site was eventually abandoned. Sometime in the early medieval period, the fortresses fell silent.
There is little sign of violent destruction, which suggests the inhabitants may have left gradually rather than fleeing an invading army. One likely explanation is that changes in the course of the Amu Darya transformed the fertile delta into desert. As canals dried up and farmland disappeared, the strategic role of Ayaz Kala may have vanished, leaving the fortresses stranded in an increasingly barren landscape. Today, the ruins stand alone against the desert sky, their crumbling walls shaped by wind and sand. They remain among the most impressive archaeological sites in Central Asia, reminders that landscapes can change dramatically and that entire civilizations can disappear while their monuments endure. Ayaz Kala continues to challenge our understanding of the ancient world. Its massive walls, strategic layout, and remote setting suggest that it once played a vital role in a sophisticated regional defense system. Yet the full story of who built these fortresses, what they protected, and why they were abandoned still lies hidden beneath the sands of the Kizilkum. Some places seem to resist time itself. Empires rise and fall, armies march through, cities burn and are rebuilt, and yet one location remains occupied again and again for thousands of years. In northern Syria, at the center of one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities on Earth, a massive fortress rises from an almost perfectly shaped hill. At first glance, it looks like a medieval castle, but that appearance may be misleading. The Citadel of Aleppo may stand on top of an enormous archaeological mound, a hill formed slowly by countless destroyed cities buried beneath one another. Under its walls could lie temples, palaces, and entire lost settlements stacked like layers of buried memory. The deeper archaeologists look, the more unsettling the possibility becomes. This fortress may not simply guard Aleppo. It may be guarding the remains of civilizations older than recorded history. The Citadel of Aleppo stands at the center of the ancient city of Aleppo. Rising about 50 meters above the surrounding streets, its huge mound dominates the skyline and creates one of the most iconic silhouettes in the Middle East. For centuries, travelers described it as an impregnable fortress, a stone stronghold set on an isolated hill in the middle of the city. But the hill itself soon became one of the site's greatest mysteries. Historical texts show that this place was already important in the Bronze Age, more than 4,000 years ago. Ancient inscriptions refer to a temple dedicated to the storm god Hadad that once stood on this very hill. Over time, many different civilizations recognized the strategic value of the site. Hittites, Assyrians, Greeks,
Romans, Byzantines, and later Islamic dynasties all occupied or rebuilt it in different eras. Modern archaeological study began in the 19th century, when scholars documenting the Near East examined the fortress in detail. Excavations later revealed that the walls visible today were largely built during the Ayyubid period in the 12th and 13th centuries, in the age of Saladin. But as researchers investigated the deeper layers beneath the citadel, they began uncovering evidence from far older periods. It became clear that the Citadel of Aleppo had not been built once. It had been built again and again, each civilization raising new walls and buildings on top of the ruins left by those before. The most remarkable mystery surrounding the citadel is not the fortress itself, but the hill beneath it. Unlike castles built on natural ridges or mountains, this mound is widely believed to be a tell, an artificial hill formed by thousands of years of human occupation. In ancient cities, when buildings collapsed or were destroyed, later inhabitants often built directly on top of the debris. Over centuries, layers of broken brick, stone, mud, and soil gradually raised the ground higher and higher. At Aleppo, that process may have continued for millennia. If so, then the mound beneath the citadel may contain the remains of many buried settlements. Entire temples, palaces, and fortifications from different periods could lie hidden within the hill itself. In that sense, the Citadel of Aleppo may not be a castle on a hill at all. It may be a castle on top of a buried history of cities. Because large sections of the citadel remain standing, archaeologists have rarely been able to excavate the deepest levels. Removing them would require dismantling parts of the fortress, which is rarely possible. As a result, much of the site's earliest history remains locked inside the mound, hidden from view. Beyond the mysterious hill, the citadel contains other features that continue to puzzle historians. One of the most fascinating is the entrance system. To reach the main gate, visitors must cross a long stone bridge over a deep moat cut around the base of the hill. At the end of the bridge rises a monumental gateway tower, beyond which lies a sharply twisting passage. This was no accident. The narrow turns forced attackers to slow down, while defenders above could strike from several directions. Military historians often regard it as one of the most sophisticated defensive entrance systems of the medieval world.
Inside the citadel, excavations have uncovered the remains of an entire fortified city. Royal palaces, barracks, storage halls, baths, and a large mosque once stood inside its walls. Deep wells and underground water systems allowed defenders to survive long sieges without leaving the fortress. Another mystery concerns the huge stone blocks used in construction. Some weigh several tons and were placed with impressive precision. Given the height of the mound and the technology of earlier centuries, historians still debate how such heavy material was moved to the top and set so accurately. The citadel also endured repeated invasions and natural disasters. Mongol forces attacked it in the 13th century, and powerful earthquakes damaged it many times. Yet after each destruction, it was rebuilt, strengthened, and adapted. Every cycle of ruin and reconstruction added more layers to the archaeological puzzle hidden below. On the remote, wind-swept coast of the North Atlantic, where the sea pounds endlessly against the cliffs of the Shetland Islands, there exists a place where history seems stacked in stone. Houses, towers, and walls lie layered one atop another like chapters in a book written across 4,000 years. This is Jarlshof, one of the most extraordinary archaeological sites in Northern Europe. At first glance, it appears to be little more than a cluster of ancient ruins. But beneath those weathered stones lies a mystery stretching across millennia. Again and again, generation after generation returned to this exact place, built homes there,
abandoned them, and then built again. Few places on Earth preserve such a continuous record of human life. Jarlshof lies at the southern tip of Shetland mainland, overlooking rough waters where the North Sea meets the Atlantic. The region is harsh and isolated. Powerful winds sweep across the low ground. Winters are cold and long, and the surrounding seas can be unforgiving. Yet, despite all of that, people kept coming back. The site remained largely unknown until the late 19th century, when coastal erosion near the estate of Sumborough exposed ancient stone walls in the collapsing cliffs. Archaeologists soon realized they were looking not at a single settlement, but at many different occupations layered on top of one another. Excavations in the early 20th century, especially those led by Alexander Kurl, slowly revealed the incredible complexity of the place. What emerged was not one village, but a sequence of settlements spanning thousands of years. Archaeologists uncovered a late Neolithic village dating to around 2500 BCE. Above it were Bronze Age houses. Higher still came Iron Age structures, including a massive defensive tower known as a broch. Later layers revealed circular buildings called wheelhouses, followed by Norse longhouses from the Viking period. Each generation had built directly on the ruins of the last. That is Jarlshof's greatest mystery. For more than 4,000 years, vastly different cultures repeatedly chose the exact same patch of land as home. In most parts of the world, settlements shift with changing climates, resources, and political circumstances. Yet Jarlshof seems to have held a strange and lasting attraction. The earliest inhabitants built small stone dwellings partly sunk into the ground to resist the brutal island winds. Centuries later, Bronze Age settlers raised thicker-walled homes with more advanced construction methods. Then, in the Iron Age, the site changed dramatically with the appearance of a broch, one of the most enigmatic structures in prehistoric Britain. Brochs were tall stone towers built without mortar, often more than 13 meters high, with massively thick walls containing stairways and hidden passages. Building such a structure required remarkable engineering, yet archaeologists still debate their purpose. Were they fortresses, elite residences, communal centers, or symbols of political power? Even after the broch fell into ruin, the site was not abandoned. Wheelhouses were later built nearby, their interiors supported by stone piers arranged like the spokes of a wheel. Scholars still debate whether they were purely domestic spaces or had ceremonial significance as well. Then came the Norse settlers. When Vikings reached Shetland in the early medieval period, they built their longhouses directly among the older ruins. Rather than clearing the past away, they incorporated it into their own settlement. Viking farmers lived there, raised animals, repaired boats, and traded across the northern seas. That continuity is what makes Jarlshof so extraordinary. From prehistoric farmers to Viking seafarers, very different societies all selected the same small coastal site as a place worth returning to. Some researchers think the reason was practical: access to sheltered landing places, grazing land, and views over important sea routes. Others suspect deeper cultural or symbolic reasons may have drawn later settlers to build upon older ruins. The broch remains especially mysterious. These towers are found only in northern Scotland, and their true function is still debated. The wheelhouses add another layer of uncertainty, with their unusual architecture suggesting purposes beyond ordinary domestic life. And even the Viking phase raises questions. Did the Norse settlers understand how ancient the ruins around them truly were? Or did they simply see convenient foundations for new homes? Today, Jarlshof stands as one of Europe's most remarkable archaeological landscapes. A visitor can walk from a Neolithic dwelling to a Bronze Age structure, from an Iron Age broch to a Viking house, all within one site. It is as if history itself has been laid bare. Yet the deepest mystery may be the site's persistence. Across changing climates, new technologies, and entirely different cultures, this windswept edge of Shetland kept calling people back, and no one can say with certainty why. A stone tower stands on the edge of a canyon where almost no engineer today would choose to build. For more than 7 centuries, it is balanced on the rim of a cliff in the deserts of the American Southwest. Its walls still rise with surprising precision, despite wind, erosion, and time. No metal tools shaped its stones. No modern engineering principles guided its construction. Yet it remains standing, deliberate and stubborn, as if placed there to challenge the very logic of the landscape. This is the Hovenweep Square Tower, one of the most puzzling structures left behind by the people archaeologists call the ancestral Puebloans. The tower stands within what is now Hovenweep National Monument, along the border of Utah and Colorado. Today, the region appears quiet and empty, marked by dry mesas, juniper trees, and deep sandstone canyons. But in the 12th and 13th centuries, this harsh land supported a thriving network of settlements built by the ancestors of modern Pueblo peoples. Archaeological surveys have revealed clusters of towers, dwellings, and defensive walls spread along canyon rims overlooking small farming communities. When explorers first documented the ruins in the 19th century, they were struck by how unusual they looked. Unlike the famous cliff dwellings hidden beneath rock overhangs elsewhere in the Southwest, the structures at Hovenweep were boldly exposed. Towers stood right on canyon edges, overlooking the valleys below. Among them, the Square Tower quickly became the most famous. Rising roughly 2 stories high, it is built from sandstone blocks carefully shaped and fitted with mud mortar. Despite its name, the tower is not a perfect square, but slightly trapezoidal, likely an adjustment made to fit the uneven bedrock beneath it. What astonishes archaeologists most is how the structure was anchored directly to the canyon rim. Part of its foundation sits on sloping rock that falls sharply toward the drop below. In modern construction, such a place would usually be avoided because of the danger of erosion and collapse. But the ancient builders chose it intentionally, aligning the lower stones with the contours of the cliff. The masonry itself is impressive. The outer walls are made of neatly arranged sandstone blocks laid in fairly even courses, giving the tower a clean geometric appearance. Behind the exterior lies a packed core of smaller stones and sediment, a method known as core and veneer masonry. This reveals a sophisticated understanding of structural stability. Even after centuries of heat, frost, and desert weather, the tower still stands. Perhaps the most intriguing detail is the arrangement of narrow openings in the walls. These windows and slots do not seem random. Researchers have observed that sunlight passes through them in highly specific ways during certain times of the year, especially near the summer and winter solstices. Beams of light strike interior surfaces and nearby stones in patterns that suggest intentional alignment. That has led some archaeologists to believe the Square Tower may have served as an astronomical marker as well as a building. If so, it would show that its builders had a careful understanding of celestial cycles. Many ancient cultures incorporated astronomy into architecture, but Hovenweep is unusual because this possible function appears in a relatively small, isolated tower, rather than a large ceremonial complex. Beyond the astronomical theory, the tower raises other questions. One interpretation suggests it functioned as a watchtower, from which inhabitants could monitor movement through the surrounding valleys. Another argues it had a ceremonial role connected to nearby kivas, the underground ritual chambers associated with Puebloan life. A third possibility is that it served several purposes at once. In ancient architecture, practical and symbolic functions often existed together. The mystery deepens when we consider the fate of the people who built it. In the late 13th century, the Hovenweep region was gradually abandoned. Archaeological evidence suggests drought and environmental stress may have forced communities to move south to more sustainable areas. Their towers and dwellings were left behind to face centuries of silence. Today, the Square Tower remains one of the most striking structures in Hovenweep. Visitors standing beside it can look down into the canyon and imagine the world that once surrounded it. Farmers tending crops, builders shaping sandstone, and observers watching the sun trace ancient patterns through carefully placed openings. More than 700 years after it was built, the Hovenweep Square Tower still blurs the line between archaeology and mystery. Was it a lookout post, a solar marker, or a ceremonial structure tied to beliefs now lost? For now, the answer remains locked within the silent geometry of its stones. Few ruins in the world look as deceptively simple as the massive earthen walls rising from the desert plains of Central Asia. From a distance, they resemble long ridges of dried clay shaped by time and wind. But as you get closer, their scale becomes impossible to ignore. These walls once enclosed a fortress city so vast and so carefully designed that it stood for centuries as one of the great strongholds along the routes that linked east and west. Long before modern borders existed, caravans traveling the Silk Road passed through this city, carrying silk, spices, metals, and ideas between distant civilizations. Today, it is silent. The markets are gone, the towers broken, and the wind moves through corridors where soldiers once stood watch. These are the ruins of Merv, and at their heart lies the mysterious fortress of Gyaur Kala. The remains of Gyaur Kala stand in modern Turkmenistan, within the immense archaeological complex of ancient Merv. In antiquity, this was a fertile oasis fed by the Mangup River and surrounded by the deserts of Central Asia. Because of that oasis, Merv became one of the most important urban centers along the Silk Road. Traders moving between Persia, India, China, and the Mediterranean passed through it, turning the city into a center of commerce, power, and culture. Archaeologists began studying Merv in a systematic way during the 19th century, when explorers realized that the desert held not just one ancient city, but several successive cities built in different periods. Among them, Gyaur Kala was one of the oldest and most imposing. It is believed to have been founded during the Parthian period, around the 3rd century BCE. Later, it continued to flourish under the Sasanian Empire and remained occupied into the early Islamic era. Seen from above, the layout of Gyaur Kala reveals the ambition of its builders. The city was enclosed by immense rectangular walls stretching nearly 2 kilometers around. Even after centuries of erosion, the defenses remain towering masses of sun-dried mud brick. Hundreds of semicircular towers once projected from the outer walls, forming a repeating pattern that turned the entire city into a formidable stronghold. For centuries, much of the fortress lay buried under sand and sediment, preserving some features while hiding others. Only modern surveys and aerial mapping have revealed the full scale of the site. The most remarkable feature of Gyaur Kala is the wall system itself. Unlike the stone fortresses of many ancient cities, these defenses were built almost entirely from mud brick. At first, that may sound fragile, but the construction shows impressive engineering skill. In many areas, the ramparts were more than 8 meters thick, reinforced through multiple building phases. Rather than serving as a simple barrier, the walls were designed as complex defensive structures. Inside them, archaeologists have found passages and chambers that allowed defenders to move through the walls themselves. The towers were carefully spaced to create overlapping fields of fire. Archers stationed on them could defend the wall's entire length and prevent enemies from approaching unseen. The result was a fortress whose defenses worked as an integrated system. What makes that achievement even more striking is the environment. The Merv Oasis lies in a harsh desert climate where wind erosion, seasonal flooding, and extreme temperatures threaten mud architecture. Yet, despite more than 2,000 years of exposure, the walls of Gyaur Kala still survive. That suggests its builders understood their materials at a very sophisticated level. Even with all that engineering, the scale of the fortress remains puzzling. Estimates suggest the earliest population may not have required defenses so enormous. The walls seem almost oversized, as though they were built in preparation for threats greater than the city initially faced. Some historians believe Gyaur Kala was intended as a major military stronghold, controlling a crucial section of the Silk Road. Whoever held Merv could influence trade across much of Central Asia. That may explain why such immense defenses were necessary. Inside the walls, excavations have uncovered traces of temples, residential districts, administrative buildings, and military installations. Evidence also suggests the city was an important center of Zoroastrian activity during the Parthian and Sasanian eras. Yet, much of the city still lies unexplored beneath layers of sand. Another enduring mystery concerns the irrigation network that made the oasis possible. Merv's survival depended on a complex system of canals branching from the Mangup River and carrying water into the surrounding land. Although traces of those canals survive, the full extent of the hydraulic system is still not completely understood. Without it, no large city could have existed in such an arid setting. Then there is the mystery of decline. Over time, settlement shifted to other cities within the Merv Oasis. By the early medieval period, Gyaur Kala was largely abandoned. Its once powerful walls fell silent as people moved away, leaving behind towers, streets, and empty spaces where a great city had once flourished. Today, the walls of Gyaur Kala stand alone in the desert, weathered but still imposing. They are the silent remains of a fortress city that once guarded one of the most important crossroads of the ancient world. Their immense scale hints at forgotten military strategies and lost traditions of engineering. And although archaeologists have uncovered many details, the deeper story remains incomplete. Why did ancient builders design such an enormous fortress in the middle of a desert oasis? What dangers were they preparing for? And how many secrets of the Silk Road still lie buried beneath the sands around Merv? For now, the desert keeps its answers. Read the entire script in one continuous, single narrator performance using James only. Keep the delivery dramatic, cinematic, controlled, and immersive, like a high-retention YouTube documentary narrator. Keep pauses to an absolute minimum, avoid long breaks between paragraphs, and maintain forward momentum so listeners do not get bored. Deliver slightly faster than normal, approximating 1.3 times listener pace through tight phrasing and brisk cadence while preserving clarity. Keep voice identity fully consistent from start to finish, with no character switching, no multiple narrators, and no change in accent or persona.